I've played some video games. It's the end of the year, which means every gaming related outlet and content creator is hastily searching Wikipedia for the biggest releases of the last 12 months, thoughtfully considering their strengths and weaknesses, and then giving an award to whichever one paid them the most money. So, let's talk game awards. I'm not going to be doing dozens of categories because frankly they're all a bit arbitrary, and I don't know whether it means anything to you, the viewer, for me to give out an award called Best Use of the Colour Red, although if I was, it'd clearly be Doom Eternal. Instead, there are only two categories, the game I enjoyed the most, and the LTGD Game of the Year. Now, you might be thinking, how are they not the same game? How could I possibly give Game of the Year to something I didn't enjoy as much as something else? Easy. I have weird taste. Something doesn't necessarily have to be the best, or even sometimes good, for you to enjoy it. Anyone who's ever watched The Room can tell you that.
How much is it?
It'll be $18.
Here you go. Keep the change. Hi, doggy.
But enjoyment is still an important and valid reason to recognise a game, and I think a lot of end-of-year awards get too obsessed with technical mastery, or stunning art direction, or epic soundtrack without ever thinking, yes, but did I enjoy myself? As an example, look at the continued success of Genshin Impact, which has millions of players and hundreds of thousands of concurrent players, many of whom are clearly enjoying it, but barely shows up anywhere in the end-of-year roundups due to various biases that I don't have the time to go into here. Just know that enjoyment is a valid reason to acknowledge and celebrate a game's achievements. I'll also only be including games that I've actually played, which rules out big hitters like Half-Life Alyx, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Immortals: Phoenix Rising, and, quite shamefully, Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon, which at the time of writing I've just bought in the Steam Winter Sale, so maybe expect a sudden abrupt jump cut at the end of the video, if the first couple of hours immediately makes me question everything I'm about to say. Right, that's enough waffle, let's get our first category underway. The first entry in the shortlist for my most enjoyed game of the year is one of the most polished and well executed games from conception to delivery that I think I've ever played. The roguelike genre has been in need of a shake-up ever since Binding of Isaac got its 49th content expansion, but the weird thing about Hades is how much it doesn't change. Looking at the primary gameplay loop, Hades isn't really anything special. You go through randomly generated dungeons, mowing down enemies and collecting randomly spawning power-ups to the point that your character build is based more on luck than judgment, and death sends you all the way back to the start. So far, it sounds like a Unity tutorial for making your first ever game. But context is everything, and Hades takes this standard and, dare I say it, slightly tired genre and plasters over the usual holes with well-written dialogue, beautiful presentation, and a progression system that works very hard to mitigate the frustration that comes from frequent restarts. It also makes sure that the bits that are old and familiar are done to the highest possible standard. It's a bit like getting an ornate wooden chest for Christmas that has an expensive pair of pants inside. The core of what you've got is the best example of something a bit familiar and maybe even boring, but the way that it's wrapped makes you appreciate just how comforting and pleasing this gift can be. Next on the shortlist is... This game's a difficult sell if you're not a fan of either Zelda or Dynasty Warriors, and if you're not, then I'll be honest, you have absolutely no reason to play it whatsoever. The design elements of the game aren't even particularly good. It's still a repetitive grind fest with the same half a dozen objectives played over and over, while you watch some numbers go up, and the performance, especially in handheld mode, sometimes makes it feel like going to DeviantArt and displaying all the results for Legend of Zelda in a slideshow. Despite all that, I had an amazing time with it. I like to think I'm self-aware enough to wear my personal biases on my sleeve, and the Zelda series is my favourite of all time. I've said before that you could write the word Zelda on a stick and I'd probably pay $29.99 for it, but that's okay, it just means I know what I like. And if you know what you like, and what you liked was the first Hyrule Warriors, then you'll also like this one, because it's that, but more of it. If you've been keeping up with my devlog series, and you should, by the way, I'm chronicling the design and development of a game from the idea stage all the way to its Steam release, so go check that out after you're done here, then you'll remember that episode 4 was all about game design failure. In that video I said some very harsh things about Watch Dogs Legion, and I still stand by them. It's still an unbalanced, cowardly game with some nice ideas that Ubisoft utterly failed to put any faith in. But there is something deeply cathartic about running around London messing everything up with a little robot spider and a phone that can blow up a bus. I'm going to get put on a watch list now. The systems at play in Legion are brilliant, but the execution is what made me have to criticise it so much. If you go around in the sandbox instead, and don't pay too much attention to their ham-fisted attempt at a serious story, you'll have a pretty good time for quite a while before it gets old. It's the Batman effect of being incredibly overpowered so nothing feels particularly challenging, but for a while you can enjoy being incredibly overpowered. The truth is though, this award could only ever go to one game, and you'll see now why I had to make a distinction between the two categories. The LTGD Most Enjoyed Game for 2020 is... Final Fantasy VII Remake, or to give it a more accurate title, Tetsuya Nomura's Sephiroth fanfiction Extra Belts Edition, is a game for 11-year-olds. The combat is flashy and a little bit shallow, the presentation is stunning, and the gameplay is railroaded so much that the most well-designed and suitable setting in the game is the train graveyard. It's not a deep, meaningful experience. It's certainly not a well-written story, and the amount of arbitrary padding doing pointless busy work turns what ought to be a well-paced 8-hour game into a season of Dragon Ball Z with all the filler left in. The thing is, I am 11 years old. Alright, I'm not, obviously. But when I played the original Final Fantasy VII, I was. It released here in 1997, but I didn't get to play it until the year later. And what you play in those formative years sticks with you and shapes so much of what you go on to enjoy and value later on. 7 Remake is all about nostalgia, and for all its flaws I have to be honest, and say that I don't think I've enjoyed anything this year quite as much as watching Cloud and the gang dash and jump and slash and explode stuff that when I was 11 looked like a Playmobil figurine. I remember being amazed and wowed by the FMV cutscenes in the original, and this year I got to play something where the standard moment-to-moment gameplay looked better than the cutscenes used to, which, as a neat little experience, is something kind of unique and overall really enjoyable. I wouldn't recommend it to people, unless they were specifically a child when they played the original game, because it needs that nostalgic brainworm to trick you into thinking that what they're doing is good. Then maybe you can overlook the fact that you spend a suspiciously long amount of time slowly shimmying through tight spaces to fit through a wall while the level loads, or that stupid bit where you're moving a crane and it won't let you just smush Aerith into paste. Right, that's one down, one more to go. Time to move on to the big one. I should probably explain the difference between these two and what I look for in my game of the year. If any of you follow Game Maker's Toolkit, and you should because British people who talk about game design make the best content, you'll know that Mark doesn't do a game of the year as such, and instead looks at the most innovative game of the last 12 months instead. I have a similar thing. My criteria is about intention, and to what degree a game makes its intentions visibly clear and then delivers on that intent. If you're confused, I did a whole video on a game's intent as part of my devlog series, which you should probably go and watch after this. It's for this reason that I won't and can't include the big yellow elephant in the room. I have been playing it non-stop since it came out, and I'm having an amazing time getting sucked into Night City, but I can't consider it for this because 90% of the people who play it aren't getting the intended experience. I'm fortunate enough to be on an RTX 3080, so my Cyberpunk plays very differently to someone who bought it on their launch day PlayStation 4. I'm not going to get bogged down in whether the first game that can truly be considered next-gen should run with any parity at all on hardware that came out when Barack Obama was president, but I can't in good conscience give an award based on intent when technical limitations stop most people from even being able to experience what that intention is. I think what makes a game worthy of praise and an award is how it fulfills the design intent that the team had for the game, and how much that intent and the execution of it resonates with me. That sounds a bit pretentious, so I'll give you an example. It's not going to be The Last of Us 2. Playing through Last of Us 2, you'll pick up pretty early on that the developer's intent with this is to take you on a harrowing, dark, depressing, emotional roller coaster. Except it's a roller coaster that only goes down. It just keeps getting worse all the time, and I came away from it with the overriding sense that it's just misery porn. You know those books and movies that are about some poor soul's life, and how every time they woke up something awful happened and every day was suffering and pain? Or the excellent but relentlessly miserable Grave of the Fireflies? It's a bit like that, and they delivered on that pretty well, but that intent doesn't resonate with me at all. I find going through stuff like that exhausting, and it's just not what I want out of anything, really, especially this year where everything was terrible all of the time already. There's a reason why Animal Crossing did extra well with people this year, and it's because the world we live in was sad enough that what a lot of people wanted was something a bit less grim, where they could take back a bit of agency and in a miraculous feat of unrealistic escapism actually pay off their debts. Last of Us 2 might be good, and it certainly does what it sets out to do. It's just that what it sets out to do isn't quite what some people, including me, wanted in 2020. Instead, Game of the Year has to go to a title that did exactly what I wanted it to do. A game that wore its history and lineage proudly on its sleeve and stepped up to the pressures and expectations that come with it. 2020's LTGD Game of the Year is... It's weird to me how much this game has dropped off people's end-of-year lists. A game that had every opportunity to be a massive letdown, but instead delivered everything you'd want from a rebirth of an old franchise. If you follow the history of stuff like this, you'll know that a new Streets of Rage game was prototyped, pitched, started and cancelled more times than Neil Druckmann looks smug. So it's a miracle it even made it to release, let alone being any good. Bearing in mind that intent is everything, the intention behind Streets of Rage 4 had to be so clear, and was obviously a massive gamble right down to the title. Slapping 4 on the end means that this is meant to be seen directly in line with the other 3 games in the series, the last of which came out in 1994 before most of you were alive, because I'm an old man. The last time Sega decided to just put a 4 on something old and classic, we got an uninspired Sonic game that nobody liked. But the intent behind Streets of Rage 4 is clear. Bring it back, make it relevant and up to date, with all of the design considerations that we've come to expect from a game in 2020, while still making it fit in the story lineage of the Mega Drive classics. In fact, lead programmer Cyril Lagarigue, if you ever see this, I'm sorry I just butchered your name, confirmed as much in an interview when he said, "The main challenge of the project was finding the line, from every part of the game, like the art style and the gameplay. Finding the line of, do we copy what existed before because the game was so revered? What do we modernise? What do we change?" If you play Streets of Rage 4, you'll come to understand how much every decision has clearly been thoroughly considered, from the deliberate slower pacing to adding things like wall bounce or the hand-drawn style of the new Wonder Boy games. Streets of Rage was always a series about style. It has a very particular place in time, set in a cheesy 80s action movie, about rogue police taking the law into their own hands to clean up their city. It's grimy, cool, dark and stylish, and the new game calls back to this with the same battered city streets, dingy docks and fighting on top of a train because it's neat. The combat is surprisingly deep for a genre that fell out of favour over 2 decades ago. The soundtrack is full of what I think the kids still call bangers, and there's so much polish dripping from every facet of Streets of Rage 4 that it's impossible not to be impressed. Hades came close to winning this too, and I fully endorse anyone who puts that at the top of their arbitrary end-of-year award show, but on the criteria of game that best fulfills the developer's intentions and has an intent that resonates hard with me, there could be no more deserving winner for the clearly prestigious LTGD Game of the Year than Streets of Rage 4. Unless you disagree, and if you do, I invite you to start arguing in the comments below about how wrong I am. If you've liked this video, please like this video and subscribe for more brilliant or terrible opinions, delete as applicable. Whatever you're doing for Christmas this year, I hope it's as good as it can be, and thank you for supporting the channel since its birth in the latter half of 2020. There's big things planned for next year and I'd love to have you along on the journey. The channel was just recently cleared for monetization, so there's a sense that I might actually be able to turn this into something. Abrupt jump cut, Game of the Year is actually Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon. And on that bombshell, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you the next time I'm thinking, hey, let's talk game design.